So in our last videos, we discussed early English colonial expansion and early English colonial culture. And as we saw, many of the colonies were often basically autonomous areas in which each colony was basically able to do its own thing in regards to religion or other matters, and that many of the towns were set up as private adventures with some support back from the English crown. Eventually, they were going to become more and more integrated into the empire and really, you know, not independent colonies, but colonies that are responsible to or in the possession of the English crown. Okay, now, um, so I thought this little short clip by the famous historian Eric Foner on the moment of the Glorious Revolution, which we're not going to go into much detail here, but shows you how this revolution affected what was happening in the British Isles, and then how that applied to what was going to be happening in the colonies, and how we then see this, in a sense, developed phase of colonial life. Okay, so here's this clip.
The Glorious Revolution in England, 1689, etc., was stimulated by fear in England that the monarch, James II, was moving toward reestablishing Catholicism, or at least giving greater toleration to Roman Catholics, which indeed he did. And a group of Protestants and supporters of Parliament who didn't like the way he was governing the country basically brought in William of Orange in a coup d'état, basically, to overthrow James and become William III. And one of the things that comes immediately after that is a decree of religious toleration for Protestants. This does not include Catholics, but all Protestant groups are now going to be allowed to worship freely. Now, still, people who are not members of the Church of England, the official church, still suffer certain political disabilities. They could not go to university, they could not hold public office, but in terms of practicing their own religion, they were now free to do so without interference. And this principle of toleration does extend over to the American colonies. For example, the new British government forced Massachusetts, the Puritan colony, to adopt this principle of toleration. The Puritans in the 17th century were not tolerant in the slightest. They kicked out of Massachusetts people who didn't adhere to the Puritan beliefs. Roger Williams was thrown out. Anne Hutchinson, who had criticized certain aspects of Puritan practice, was expelled. Quakers were made illegal. A couple of Quakers were even executed in the early 1660s or late 1650s in Massachusetts. But now, as a result of the Glorious Revolution, Massachusetts was required to accept this principle of toleration for Protestants. It was not complete religious toleration as we would understand it today, but it was an attempt to end these many, many years of battles among different Protestant denominations as to what was going to be the best, official form of worship.
Okay, so this is a perfect example of complementing what we already just learned in our last section, right? That we had this lack of religious toleration by a very conservative, kind of theocratic-minded group of colonists, and that also at the same time that the events that were happening here were very much interconnected to what was happening in Europe, and very much more so specifically in Britain, right? Okay, and so that's again where I want us to always stop and pause and realize when I talked earlier about the United States coming out of a European project, and to also remind ourselves, because we talked about the anti-Catholicism of Puritans, and here he brings up another point: the battle that various Protestants were having, even with each other, over this issue of what is true Christianity. The religious wars taking place in Europe and in Britain were happening here in the colonies, which is now the United States, and the changes of policy or the maneuvering of leadership in the British Isles was also going to affect us here. So in a sense, the first seeds of religious toleration, we have to give credit to British royalty. Okay, just wanted to point that out, and that wasn't something that was happening from the colonists on the ground per se. Okay, but the topic of this set of lectures is the empire under strain. And so what we're going to talk about then is the very important background to what's going to lead to the American Revolution. That the colonies are obviously far away. Obviously, the colonists don't necessarily always want what the British Empire wants. Okay? This is all something that we have to address. And so let me then now move on to the next section here. So, what would the king and parliament do? And so here we have in England power to appoint governors and colonial officials, regulate trade, but parliament had more power. So we already kind of see, sometimes I think that the way that we portray the way that the British were the War of Independence is that we had this all-powerful evil king who wanted to stomp out freedom for the colonists. And in fact, there was already a power-sharing aspect in which Parliament had a major role, in England. Okay, so I just want to point that out. All right, now, but what about British rule of the colonies? It was decentralized and it was inefficient. There was no colonial office in London. Few officials actually ever went to America to understand what it was like. And if anybody works at a job where you have a corporation or something, and you're being told you need to do X, Y, and Z, and they never actually come to your work environment to see if that's even realistic, and it's very frustrating, and you get annoyed, right? That some bigwig out in Kansas or somewhere else far away from your state, wherever you're living, is telling you that you need to do something over where you're at, and they're not even coming to see you. And colonial appointments were also not on merit. In other words, people that were helping out with the colonies were not even necessarily people that the colonists would favor. So these kind of things are going to lead a certain agitation. We're having a dysfunctional relationship between the colonies and the mother of the colonies, right? Okay, and that's something to look at. Now, in regards to colonial authorities, they often resisted imperial authority. By the 1750s, American assemblies were claiming the right to levy taxes and pass laws, but their limitations were that they could be vetoed by governor or British authority. So you can already see here that elites and locals are just basically feeling that they can do things on their own, and they're not really valuing or seeing the value, rightly or wrongly, of needing to answer to Britain. Okay, and obviously under this kind of situation, it's not hard to see that they're things could escalate into a separation between the two. So I'm going to stop there and we'll go on to the next lecture.